those who don't understand the power of Bengali, even those in Delhi who do not understand the power of Bengali, will never come to terms with Bengal's emotional power. With Bengal's separate idea of religion itself. Bengal doesn't have gods, it has goddesses. The Pakistan movement led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. The Muslim League never fought for the freedom of India from the British. It only wanted freedom of some Muslims from Hindus. India and America, at least in my view, will always be friends because they have absolutely no reason for enmity. Understanding of the forces that shape our subcontinent, the historical forces that shape our subcontinent. And that is what I hope to dwell on in the few minutes allotted to me by our pleasant dictator. And by the way, before I start, may I take an issue with the title of this book? Please do not use the word radical for regressive forces. Radical forces represent something very different in the history of ideas. Radical forces which are progressive, they may not be acceptable by the status quo, but they inspire change, they inspire thinking, facts. They may in fact be ahead of facts. Right? Regressive forces are those that take you back into an artificial past. And that is what the Jamaat is doing, and that is what I hope to dwell on. Also, just on a personal note, I hope Shariar is freed. We've known him for a long while, and let's hope the return of democracy will mean that. But your own threats that you referred to, one thing history teaches you, that the past is static. All change belongs to the future. So let's hope that the change is more positive than Bangladesh is going through what can be described as an existential crisis. This is not a challenge to a government alone. If it was simply a challenge to even the Awami League government, we could have dealt with it in the normal analysis that we have, because democracy is really the right to change governments, not to re-elect them. Even despots and dictators want to be re-elected in some form. Democracy is the right to change governments. And if this had been a change of government in the democratic process, we wouldn't be here, and I don't think we'd be publishing this book. What this represents is a challenge to the very idea of 1979. And that is what makes this a very seminal point in the history. To understand that, we have to also realize who was defeated in 1971. The defeat of the Pakistani army, it is the only known case of 93,000 soldiers surrendering their arms. And I often wonder why. I assume it is because they never believed in the cause they were fighting for. But that apart, the 1971 represents a defeat of what might be called, or not might be called, what are the forces that created the idea of partition. The idea of partition was built around, within the limitations of time, one has to use a bit of shorthand. But the idea of partition was built around one very important fact that you must understand about the Pakistan movement led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. The Muslim League never fought for the freedom of India from the British. It only wanted freedom of some Muslims from Hindus. That was the raison d'etre of the Muslim League. And that Muslim League movement, whether it has suffered setback or it has established itself, as a state retains the power of some support elsewhere. And in Bangladesh, while it was defeated in 1971, that did not mean that it evaporated. Those forces were waiting for an opportunity. The other force that was defeated in 1971, as those of you who have followed the history would know, is, and remember that the Sixth Fleet's arrival very nearly became an important factor in the course of the war. So the forces of what I call Richard Nixon were defeated also in 1971. But the American interest, whether it is in Pakistan or whether it is what was then East Pakistan and today Bangladesh, is not ideological. The American interest is mainly strategic, as those of us who followed the news of the last few days and few weeks who know only too well. So the Americans, their strategic interests are very well defined. They will do anything for another base, another military base. And that way, for them, Pakistan was a comfort source. If I may just take a minute extra from your allotted time, it is very important to understand the nature of the India-America relationship. India and America, at least in my view, will always be friends because they have absolutely no reason for enmity. There's never been a war between them, never will be. We have never been on opposite sides, including a war. But we can never be allies. The reason why we cannot be allies is because 1947, an accident of history, determined the course of our foreign relations and determined the course of our ideologies. In 1947, India became the first country in history to reverse colonization. In fact, America was there before that, but that was in an earlier age. And therefore, India understood that there is a difference between freedom and independence. All countries after post-colonization phase were free, but not all were independent. And India understood. The first creator of a foreign policy, Jawaharlal Nehru, made this very clear that the defense of the idea of independence and strategic autonomy was very critical to the nature of policy, and that still exists. Pakistan, on the other hand, its foreign policy was defined by the Jinnah Doctrine, which has actually established, it's there in the records. I'm not creating anything that has not been confirmed by Jinnah's own papers and his own correspondence. When he said that the freedom of Pakistan has to be protected from India, which he meant quote unquote Hindu India, he never recognized the idea of secularism. That has to be protected, and for that I need an ally. I need a power. Russia would never be my friend because Russia is a communist and atheist country. They will never understand Islam. Britain and France are too weak. America is the only. In 1946, he sent his friend Isfahani to America to establish the first relationship with America. And Isfahani, by the way, sent some very wise advice. He says, if you want to woo the Americans, right, learn how to talk to them. It's still true. If you want to hear that, right? The idea of Pakistan, the weakness of in my view, the idea of Pakistan does not lie in its people. The people of Pakistan are the same as the people of India. We are as good or as bad. The idea of Pakistan lies in a fallacy that religion can be the basis of nationalism. And in particular, that Islam, or for that matter, any religion, can be the basis of nationalism. That is something that has been historically and proven to be completely wrong. If you look at the record of Islam, and I just put it again in shorthand, if Islam had been sufficient as a basis of nationalism, why would there be 22 Arab countries? They have both Islam, Sunnism, and a language in common. But a nation is created by human beings. Religion is given by God, or our idea of God. Islam lives in a mosque. Islam doesn't live in a mission. Nowhere in the Quran is Allah described as Rabbul Muslimin, or the God of Muslims. He is Rabbul Alameen. He is the God of the whole universe, of the whole Brahmakand, as every religion has. And the Quran itself says, Lakum dinakum wa iliya deen, your faith for you, my faith for me. And get on with the rest of life. Hold on to your faith. But get on to it. But this fallacy that religion could be the basis of nationalism is one that has been proven historically to be weak, fundamental. And in fact, I was just mentioning over tea that the man who was an intellectual who reminded uh, people was Ayatollah Khomeini in 1971, who went and recorded and asked, how is Islam going to come to terms with Iranian nationalism? And in the end, Iranian nationalism has prevailed over Islamism. Just now, the Taliban of Afghanistan reminded Pakistan that Islam is not the basis of national relationships. So this important difference, the history of what became, by the way, whenever we think of the British, you must remember that the basis of their empire was intellectual and economic fraud, intellectual fraud and economic exploitation. And part of the intellectual fraud was to sell the term that they actually gave India democracy. Nonsense. The 1946 elections, only 8% of the country had, 9% of the country had the vote. Because only ratepayers and those who paid taxes had the vote. Not only that, they had votes in separate electorates. In the modern era of nation states, which really begins in 1918, 1919, with the creation of the post-empire age, the civilizational state has proved to be the state which survives despite turbulence. Turbulence is created by people who are in it, sometimes for them. Egypt is a classic example of a civilizational state. And therefore, Egypt never abandons its past. The Iranians don't abandon their past. 3 weeks ago, there was a public rally against Israel in Tehran. And the large image that they used was of Darius's or Xerxes' son, the Roman emperor kneeling behind them, in front of them. They are proud of their past as Iranians. This is pre-Islamic. The idea that the basis then of there is culture and history, civilizational. The idea that history begins with the arrival of a religion is a nonsense. And no civilizational state accepts it. Of course, we all believe in our faith with the greatest amount of devotion and honesty. But we cannot deny that our language, the Arab language, is much older than Arab Islam. Bengali is much older. And this, in 1971, you had the return, or you had the formation of culture as the basis of the nation state in Bengal. The only threat, in fact, worry should have been whether West Bengal was ever going to be taken into this cultural space or not. Right? And that's a separate story. The fact is that the idea that you could turn, and therefore within 30 years of Islam being used in order to create a country, heaven knows how many miles apart, right, had to crack on the basis of human behavior. The people who believed that Islam could be the basis did not accept defeat in 71, and they have shown. Yes, and they have been held by forces. If you want to understand what is happening today, again, very quickly, I'm very conscious of my age. Today, you must remember that in maybe 2007, 8, maybe Pankaj will have a better memory of the date, where the idea of the -2 theory was first proposed and brought into play in Bangladesh that yes, we can form a government without either of the two women. Because both, see, when you consider the future, you must remember one thing about the BNP. The BNP was part of the Bengali liberation movement. If there are two starting points, then the first starting point is the speech on the radio by Major Zia, 23rd of March. And 16th of December is the culmination of that. So the BNP does represent part of the same historical experience. We all hope that the return of democracy in Bangladesh will be a two-stage process. First stage will be the present elections, and then perhaps another election which will include all parties, all legitimate parties. In fact, all parties should be there. And then the democratic process can be. So Bengal is going to live, the future of Bengal is going to be built on Bengali. Those who don't understand the power of Bengali, even those in Delhi who do not understand the power of Bengali, will never come to terms with Bengal's emotional power. They will never come to terms with Bengal's even sense of aesthetics, with Bengal's separate idea, idea of religion itself. Bengal doesn't have gods, it has goddesses. And it's very important to remember that. I think that perhaps on that note, we leave you with some things to think about. But I only do want to insist that I'm extremely happy I have watched Bangladesh swerve in the assassination of Sheikh Mujib, drift into army rule, drift out of army rule through great anger, assassinations, tragedy, and so much turmoil. With each time, through the challenges, the civilizational power of Bengal has always prevailed. And I'm absolutely confident that it will prevail again. Thank you for this book, because this book documents the past through those who have created the past. Thank you.